The Sheikh Billionaire refused to pay her tip, but a security cameras caught what she did next at midnight. The crystal chandeliers of the Azure Palace cast dancing shadows across white marble floors as Emma Carter balanced 3 plates of seared duck breast on her left arm. 26 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes the color of storm clouds, she moved to the dining room like a ghost, present but unseen. Her black uniform was pressed to perfection, her smile practiced and professional, her posture suggesting someone who had learned to make herself small in a world of giants. She had been working at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant for 8 months now, serving billionaires and celebrities who never looked at her face, only at their plates. It was a far cry from the life she had imagined 5 years ago, standing on the stage at MIT with a diploma in computer science and dreams that stretched as high as the skyscrapers outside. But dreams, she had learned, could be stolen as easily as wallets. And sometimes the thieves were engagement rings. Tonight, the restaurant hummed with the usual symphony of wealth. The clink of crystal, the murmur of deals worth millions, the soft laughter of women draped in diamonds. Emma delivered the duck to table 7, refilled water glasses at table 3, and tried not to think about the algorithms that still danced through her mind at night, complex and beautiful and forever out of reach. Then the doors opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid entered like a storm system. 6 feet 2 inches of controlled power wrapped in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Emma's annual salary. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, his jaws sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes, deep brown, almost black, swept the room with the assessing gaze of a man who owned everything he looked at. 3 security personnel flanked him, earpieces visible, hands never far from their jackets. Behind them came 2 associates in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios. The maitre d' practically bowed as he led them to the private corner table, table 1, always reserved for the most important guests. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Table 1 was in her section. She approached with her practiced smile, notepad ready. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Azure Palace. May I start you with something to drink?" Sheikh Khalid didn't look at her. He was studying the wine list with the intensity most people reserve for legal contracts. One of his associates, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, ordered sparkling water. The other, broader and younger, requested scotch. "And for you, sir?" Emma asked, directing her question to the sheik. He still didn't look up. When he spoke, his voice was deep, accented with the refined English of someone educated at Oxford or Cambridge, but carrying the unmistakable authority of old money and older power. "The 2015 Chateau Margaux. Decant it properly. If it's been stored incorrectly, I'll know." "Of course, sir." Emma made a note, her hand steady despite the dismissive tone. As she turned to leave, she heard him speak again, but not in English. The words were Arabic, fluid and casual, directed at his associates. "Another invisible American waitress. They smile with their mouths, but their eyes are dead. Service here used to be exceptional. Now it's merely adequate." Emma's step faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her mind, trained in 5 languages, including Arabic from a semester abroad in Dubai during her graduate studies, translated automatically. But she kept walking, kept her face neutral, kept her dignity intact. She had learned, over the past 2 years, that sometimes silence was the only power left of the powerless. She retrieved the wine from the cellar, decanted it with the precision her manager had drilled into her, and returned to table 1. The sheik was deep in conversation about oil futures and Middle Eastern politics, his hands gesturing with controlled elegance. Emma poured a taste into his glass, stepped back, and waited. He lifted the glass, swirled it, inhaled deeply, then tasted. For a moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then the slightest nod. Acceptable. Emma poured for the table, took their dinner orders, Wagyu steak, rare, Mediterranean sea base, lamb chops with mint reduction, and retreated to the kitchen. The rest of the service passed in a blur of courses, each delivered with impeccable timing. Each met with the same indifference from table 1. The sheik never looked at her directly, never said please or thank you, treated her with the casual disregard of someone who had never had to consider the humanity of service workers. 2 hours later, the meal concluded. Emma cleared the dessert plates. Untouched creme brulee. The Sheikh apparently didn't indulge in sweets, and presented the check in a leather folder. The total came to $4,873. Sheikh Khalid pulled out a Black American Express Centurion card. Without looking at the amount, Emma processed it at the server station, printed the receipt, and returned it to the table with a pen. That's when it happened. The Sheikh picked up the pen, reviewed the receipt with those sharp, assessing eyes, and then deliberately, slowly, drew a single line through the tip section. In the space where most guests at the Azure Palace left 20 or even 30%, he wrote in precise handwriting, "Service not worthy a tip." He signed his name with a flourish, stood, and buttoned his suit jacket. His associates followed suit, gathering their portfolios. Emma stood frozen, the receipt in her hand, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest. Around them, other diners had noticed. Whispers started. The maitre d' looked horrified. But Emma had learned something in the past 2 years of rebuilding her life from ashes. She had learned that her value wasn't determined by other people's opinions. She had learned that dignity was something you gave yourself, not something others could take away. She looked up, met Sheikh Khalid's eyes for the first time that evening, and smiled, a real smile, sad and knowing and somehow still kind. "Thank you for dining with us this evening, sir. I hope you have a wonderful night." For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. Her perfect posture, despite the insult. Her genuine smile, despite the humiliation. The intelligence in her storm-gray eyes that didn't match the uniform she wore. Then he turned and walked away, his security detail falling into formation around him. Emma stood there, holding the receipt, feeling the weight of other servers' sympathetic glances. Her manager approached, face flushed with anger. "Emma, I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I'll speak to—" "It's fine, Michael," Emma interrupted gently. "Really, it's just money." But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Tips made up most of her income. A $4,000 check should have meant at least $800 in her pocket. Instead, she had nothing but a piece of paper with an insult written on it. She finished her shift at 11:30, changed out of her uniform in the staff room, and stepped out into the cold Manhattan night. November wind cut through her thin jacket as she walked toward the subway, her mind already shifting away from the restaurant, away from the arrogant Sheikh, toward the only thing that still brought her peace. Code. Beautiful, logical, perfect code. She didn't go home to her tiny studio apartment in Queens. Instead, she walked 12 blocks to the Meridian Hotel, one of Manhattan's most exclusive properties, where Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid kept a permanent penthouse suite. She had overheard his associates mention it during dinner. But Emma wasn't going there for revenge. She wasn't going there for a confrontation. She was going there because 3 days ago, while having coffee at a cafe across the street, she had been idly running a network scan on her laptop, a habit from her old life, and had detected something that made her blood run cold. The Meridian cybersecurity system had a vulnerability, a massive, gaping hole that any competent hacker could exploit to access guest data, credit card information, passport details, security footage. The kind of vulnerability that could destroy lives, empty bank accounts, compromise the safety of some of the world's most powerful people. She had tried to report it anonymously through official channels. Her emails had gone unanswered. Her calls had been dismissed by IT staff who didn't understand the technical details she was trying to explain. So tonight, at 11:47 p.m., Emma Carter walked into Meridian's lobby wearing jeans and a sweater, her laptop bag over her shoulder, looking like any other young professional. She smiled at the night clerk, headed to the business center on the second floor, and sat down at one of the public computers. What she didn't know was that Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid was watching. In his penthouse suite 43 floors above, Khalid sat in his home office, reviewing contracts for a pipeline deal in Kazakhstan. His mind, however, kept drifting back to the waitress. Her eyes, that smile, the way she had responded to his deliberate cruelty with grace instead of anger. It bothered him, though he couldn't articulate why. His head of security, Rashid, no relation, despite the shared name, knocked and entered. "Sir, there's a situation. Someone is attempting to access the hotel's network from the business center. Our systems flagged it as a potential breach." Khalid's attention sharpened immediately. "Show me." Rashid pulled up the security feed on the large monitor. The camera showed a young woman at a computer, fingers flying across the keyboard with remarkable speed. Chestnut hair, now loose around her shoulders. A focused expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to striking. Khalid leaned forward. "That's her, sir, the waitress from dinner." His mind raced. What was she doing? Was this revenge for the tip? Some kind of identity theft scheme? But even as the thoughts formed, they felt wrong. Her body language wasn't furtive or nervous. She looked professional, concentrated, like someone solving a complex problem. "Should we have her removed?" Rashid asked. "No." Khalid stood, moving closer to the screen. "Watch her. Record everything. But don't interfere. I want to see what she does." For the next 3 hours, Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid watched Emma Carter work. He watched her fingers dance across the keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. He watched her pause, think, then attack the problem from a different angle. He watched her break through the hotel's firewall, not to steal or destroy, but to access the security architecture itself. And then he watched her fix it. Line by line, she rewrote vulnerable code. She patched the holes. She strengthened the encryption. She built additional layers of protection that even Khalid, with his limited technical knowledge, could recognize as sophisticated. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, someone for whom this level of complexity was second nature. At 2:47 a.m., she finally stopped. She sat back, stretched her neck, and reviewed her work one final time. Then she opened a text document and began typing a detailed report explaining what she had found, what she had fixed, and recommendations for additional security measures. She saved it to a flash drive, labeled it clearly for the IT department, and left it on the desk with a sticky note. "Your system had critical vulnerabilities. I've patched them temporarily, but you need a complete security overhaul. This is a gift. Please don't waste it." She packed up her laptop, stood, and walked out of the business center. The security cameras tracked her through the lobby and out into the night, where she disappeared into the subway entrance. Khalid stood in his penthouse, staring at the now empty screen, his mind reeling. A waitress. A simple waitress had just executed a cybersecurity operation that would have cost his companies hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire professionals to complete. And she had done it for free, without asking for anything, without even leaving her name. "Who is she?" he asked quietly. Rashid was already typing on his tablet. "Emma Carter, 26 years old, bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science from MIT, published 3 papers on quantum cryptography during her graduate studies. Then nothing. No employment history in tech. No social media presence. She just vanished from the industry 2 years ago." "Why?" "Unknown, sir, but I can find out." Khalid continued staring at the screen, at the frozen image of Emma's face caught in profile, illuminated by the computer's glow. Her expression in that moment was peaceful, almost happy, the look of someone doing what they were born to do. "Yes," he said finally, "find out everything." The next morning, Emma arrived at the Azure Palace for the lunch shift, exhausted but satisfied. She had done something good, something that mattered. The Sheikh's insult from the night before felt distant now, unimportant. She was setting up her section when Michael, the manager, approached with an odd expression. "Emma, there's a gentleman asking for you. Table 1. Her heart sank. "Table 1. "Of course." She walked over, professional smile in place, and stopped short. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid sat alone at the corner table, dressed in a navy suit today, his hands folded on the white tablecloth. But his expression was different from last night. Focused, intense, curious. When he saw her, he spoke in Arabic. "Who are you really?" Emma felt the world tilt. He knew. Somehow he knew. For a moment, she considered pretending not to understand. But she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of being invisible. She responded in the same language, her Arabic fluent and unaccented. I'm just someone who believes in doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. The Sheikh's eyes widened, actual, visible shock crossing his aristocratic features. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was a real smile, transforming his face from handsome to devastating. "Sit down," he said, switching back to English. "Please." "I'm working, sir." "I've already spoken to your manager." "Sit." Emma hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from him. Her heart was pounding. This man had humiliated her last night, and yet there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "I watched you last night," Khalid said without preamble, "on the security cameras. I watched you break into the Meridian's network and repair their entire cybersecurity infrastructure for free, without asking for anything in return." Emma's breath caught. "I didn't break in. I used public access to. I don't care about the technical details." He leaned forward. "I care about why. Why would someone with your skills be working as a waitress? Why would you spend 3 hours fixing a problem that isn't yours to fix? Why would you help a hotel, help me, after I deliberately insulted you?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Because the vulnerability I found could have hurt innocent people, hotel guests who had nothing to do with your rudeness. And because my value as a person isn't determined by whether you recognize it or not." Khalid sat back, something like admiration flickering across his face. "MIT, quantum cryptography. 3 published papers that I had my people pull this morning. Papers that are apparently still cited in academic circles. You were brilliant. You were going to change the industry. And then you vanished. Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the old pain rising like a tide. She had spent 2 years not talking about it, not thinking about it, burying it so deep that sometimes she could almost pretend it hadn't happened. "That's none of your business," she said quietly. "I want to hire you." The words came out flat, matter of fact, as if he were ordering coffee. Emma blinked. "Excuse me? I own 17 companies across 6 countries. Every single one of them needs cybersecurity. I watched you work last night. You're not good. You're exceptional. Name your price. Whatever you were making before you became a waitress, I'll triple it." For just a moment, Emma let herself imagine it, going back to the work she loved, using her mind again, being valued for her skills instead of her ability to carry plates. But then reality crashed back in. Men like Sheikh Khalid didn't make offers like this without strings. And she had learned the hard way what happened when you trusted powerful men who made promises. "No," she said. "Thank you, but no." Khalid's eyebrows rose. "No, no. You're refusing? Do you understand what I'm offering? Most people would." "I'm not most people." Emma stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "And I'm not for sale. Not my skills, not my time, not my dignity. Last night you treated me like I was worthless. Today you want to buy me because you saw something useful. I'm not interested in being useful to you, Sheikh Al-Rashid. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have tables to serve." She turned and walked away, her heart hammering, half expecting to call her back or make a scene. But he didn't. When she glanced back from across the dining room, he was still sitting there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. For the first time in his adult life, Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid had been told no, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt genuinely intrigued by another human being. He left a $1,000 bill on the table and walked out, his mind already working on the problem of Emma Carter, because she was a problem now, a puzzle, a mystery wrapped in a waitress uniform, hiding brilliance behind practiced smiles. And Khalid had never been able to resist a mystery. Over the next 2 weeks, he became a regular at the Azure Palace. He came for lunch, for dinner, sometimes just for coffee, always requesting Emma's section, always watching her with those sharp, assessing eyes. He never mentioned the job offer again. Instead, he talked about art, about politics, about the nature of power and responsibility. He asked her opinions on current events, on technology, on philosophy, and Emma, despite herself, found herself responding, found herself enjoying the intellectual sparring, found herself looking forward to his visits, even as she maintained her professional distance. He tested her constantly, she realized, dropping comments in different languages to see if she understood. She did, all 5 of them, leaving complex logic puzzles written on napkins, asking her opinion on technical problems disguised as casual conversation. Each time, she met his challenges with ease, and each time his respect seemed to grow. Other staff noticed. Other guests noticed. Whispers followed Emma through the restaurant. Why is the sheik so interested in her? What makes her special? Is there something going on between them? Emma ignored it all. She had learned to ignore whispers. But on the 15th day, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, the restaurant moderately busy, when Marcus Thornton walked through the doors of the Azure Palace. Emma was refilling water glasses at table 5 when she saw him. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and water. The entire restaurant went silent, and Emma stood frozen, staring at the man who had destroyed her life. Marcus Thornton, 32 years old, tall and conventionally handsome in that generic way of men who had never struggled for anything. Sandy blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that had once made her heart race and now made her stomach turn. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000, a Rolex on his wrist, and a confident air of someone who had gotten away with murder. He was talking to the maitre d', gesturing toward the private dining room. Behind him came 2 other men in suits, carrying portfolios. A business dinner. Of course, Marcus had always been good at business, especially when the business involved stealing other people's work. Emma's manager rushed over. Emma, are you okay? What happened? She couldn't speak, couldn't move. 2 years of carefully constructed composure crumbled in an instant because Marcus was here, in her restaurant, in her space, the one place she had felt safe. And then she saw where the maitre d' was leading him, to the private dining room adjacent to table 1, where Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid sat alone, reviewing documents, waiting for his dinner companions to arrive. No. Emma's mind raced. Marcus was here to meet with Khalid. Of course he was. Marcus's company, Cypher Shield Security, had exploded in the past 2 years, becoming one of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firms in the country, valued at $450 million, built entirely on the algorithm that Emma had created, the algorithm Marcus had stolen. Emma? Her manager's voice seemed to come from very far away. Do you need to take a break? No. The word came out strangled. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. She wasn't fine, but she had become very good at pretending. She cleaned up the broken glass with shaking hands, retreated to the kitchen, and tried to breathe, tried to think. Marcus hadn't seen her yet. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe she could avoid his section, get another server to cover the private dining room, make it through the night without having to face him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 20 minutes later, Michael found her in the kitchen. Emma, I need you to serve the private dining room. Sarah called in sick, and we're short-staffed. I can't. The words came out too fast, too desperate. Please, Michael, anyone else? I'll take a double shift tomorrow. I'll work the weekend, just please. Emma, what's going on? You're white as a sheet. She couldn't explain. Couldn't tell him that the man in the private dining room had once promised to marry her, had once held her while she cried over failed experiments, had once been her partner in every sense of the word, until the day he stole everything and left her with nothing but a broken heart and a destroyed reputation. Please, she whispered. Michael's expression softened. Okay, I'll figure something out. Go take 5 minutes. Emma fled to the staff bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and tried not to fall apart. She had worked so hard to rebuild, to move forward, to become someone who could survive without the career she loved, without the future she had planned. And now Marcus was here, probably about to close a massive deal with one of the richest men in the world, using her work to make himself even more successful. The injustice of it burned like acid. She splashed cold water on her face, fixed her makeup, and returned to the dining room. Michael had reassigned the private room to another server. Emma focused on her other tables, keeping her back to that part of the restaurant, pretending the world wasn't tilting on its axis. But then she heard the voice, that familiar, confident voice that still haunted her nightmares. "Emma? Emma Carter? Is that you?" She turned slowly. Marcus stood 5 feet away, having emerged from a private dining room, a glass of scotch in his hand, and that same charming smile on his face. But his eyes held cruel amusement. "Marcus." Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "Wow. I heard you'd fallen on hard times, but I didn't realize—" He gestured at her uniform, his smile widening. "A waitress? Really? That's quite a fall from MIT's rising star." Every eye in the restaurant turned toward them. Emma felt the weight of their attention, the curiosity, the pity. She lifted her chin. "I'm working honestly. Can you say the same?" The smile faltered for just a second. Then it was back, brighter than before. "Still bitter, I see. Emma, what happened between us was business. You were always too emotional to understand that. The algorithm was mine." The words came out cold and hard. Every line of code, every innovation. "Mine." "Ours," Marcus corrected smoothly. "We worked on it together, remember? And when you had your breakdown, someone had to move the project forward. I did what was necessary. I'm sorry you couldn't handle the pressure of the industry, but that's not my fault." Breakdown. He was rewriting history, making her sound unstable, making himself sound like the reasonable one. Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You stole from me," she said quietly. "You know you did. And someday, everyone else will know it too." Marcus laughed, actually laughed. "Emma, sweetheart, no one's going to believe the bitter ex-girlfriend over a CEO with a $450 million company. You should move on. Clearly, you've already moved down." He gestured at her uniform again. "This suits you better anyway. Less pressure, more your speed." He turned to walk back to the private dining room, but stopped when he saw Sheikh Khalid standing in the doorway, watching the entire exchange with eyes like chips of black ice. "Mr. Thornton," Khalid said, his voice perfectly polite and absolutely lethal, "I believe our meeting is concluded." Marcus blinked. "What? But we haven't even discussed the contract yet. I thought—" "I've changed my mind. I don't do business with thieves." Khalid's gaze flicked to Emma, then back to Marcus. "My assistant will see you out." "Thieves? What are you talking about? Who have you been listening to?" Marcus's face flushed red. "If she's been telling you lies." "Out. Now." Khalid's voice dropped to a register that made even Emma's spine straighten. "Before I have security remove you." Marcus looked between them, his expression twisting with anger and confusion. Then he grabbed his coat and stormed out, his associates scrambling to follow. The restaurant remained silent. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding, unsure whether to feel grateful or humiliated. Khalid approached her slowly, his expression unreadable. "My office," he said quietly. "Now." It wasn't a request. Emma followed him out of the restaurant, through the lobby, and into a private elevator that required a key card. They rode up in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. When the doors opened, they stepped into a penthouse suite that looked like something from a magazine, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, modern furniture in blacks and grays, art that was probably worth more than Emma would make in a lifetime. Khalid walked to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed one to Emma. She took it with shaking hands. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather sofa. She sat. He remained standing, looking down at her with those intense eyes. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." And Emma, who had kept the story locked inside for 2 years, who had told no one the full truth, who had carried the weight of it alone, finally broke. The words poured out, how she and Marcus had met in graduate school, how they'd fallen in love over late-night coding sessions and shared dreams of changing the world, how they developed the quantum cryptography algorithm together during their final year, except it hadn't really been together. She had done 87% of the work. She had the commit logs to prove it, the documentation, the early drafts in her handwriting, how Marcus had proposed 3 weeks before graduation, how she'd said yes, deliriously happy, believing they would build their future together, how he'd asked to see all her research files to organize them for the patent application, how she trusted him completely, how he'd disappeared 2 days before the wedding with all her work, how he'd registered the patents in his name alone, how he'd used his family's connections. His father was a venture capitalist, his uncle a patent attorney, to build a company around her algorithm before she even realized what was happening, how she tried to fight, hired a lawyer with money she didn't have. But Marcus's family had better lawyers. They'd buried her in paperwork, dragged out the proceedings, made it too expensive for her to continue. They'd spread rumors in the industry that she was unstable, vindictive, a jilted lover trying to steal credit for her ex's work. Within 6 months, her reputation was destroyed. No tech company would hire her. Her published papers were suddenly questioned for their validity. Former colleagues stopped returning her calls. She'd spent her savings on legal fees and had nothing to show for it, so she disappeared, changed her appearance, took a job where no one would ask about her education or her past, became invisible. "I just wanted to survive," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to make it through each day without falling apart. The algorithm was supposed to change everything. It was supposed to be my legacy. And he took it. He took everything." Khalid had sat down at some point during her story. Now he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression harder than Emma had ever seen it. "He stole from you," Khalid said flatly. "That's not business. That's theft. And I hate thieves more than anything in this world." Emma wiped her eyes. "It doesn't matter. He won. The patents are in his name. The company is his. I have no proof that would hold up in court. His lawyers made sure of that. It's over." "No." Khalid stood, pulling out his phone. "It's not over. Not even close." "What are you doing?" "Calling my legal team. My investigators. My forensic accountants." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was gentle. "You said you have commit logs? Documentation? Early drafts?" "Yes, but Marcus's lawyers already. Marcus's lawyers haven't faced my lawyers. Emma, I own companies in 17 countries. I have legal resources that most governments would envy, and I'm about to use all of them to destroy Marcus Thornton." Emma stood, her heart pounding. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Khalid stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Because you fixed a security vulnerability at 3 a.m. without asking for anything in return. Because you responded to my cruelty with grace. Because you told me no when everyone else in your position would have said yes. Because you're brilliant and brave and you deserve justice." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I'm falling in love with you and I can't stand watching you suffer for someone else's crimes." The words hung in the air between them. Emma's breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know that you're the most interesting person I've met in 20 years. I know that you challenge me, surprise me, make me want to be better than the arrogant man who refused to tip you 2 weeks ago." He smiled slightly. "I know that I think about you constantly, and I know that I want to help you get back what's yours. Not because you need me to, but because you deserve to have someone in your corner for once." Emma felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or just the simple relief of not being alone anymore. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Khalid's smile widened. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. The war against Marcus Thornton began that night. Khalid's team moved with the efficiency of a military operation. Within 48 hours, they had assembled a legal dream team. 3 senior partners from Manhattan's most prestigious law firm, 2 patent attorneys who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, and a forensic digital analyst who had worked for the FBI. Emma provided everything she had saved: backup drives with timestamped files, email chains, her original handwritten notes from graduate school, commit logs from their shared GitHub repository showing that 87% of the code had been written from her IP address. She had kept it all, even when she thought it was useless, unable to let go of the proof that she had created something beautiful. The forensic analyst spent 3 days analyzing the code. When he emerged from his review, his expression was grim. This is one of the clearest cases of intellectual property theft I've ever seen. The coding style, the variable naming conventions, even the comments in the code, they're all consistent with Ms. Carter's other work and completely inconsistent with anything Thornton has produced before or since. He didn't just steal the algorithm. He barely understood it. Khalid's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chun, reviewed the evidence with the intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. We have a case, a strong one, but Thornton has resources too. This will be a fight. Then we fight, Khalid said simply. Whatever it costs, however long it takes. Emma sat in the conference room of Khalid's Manhattan office, surrounded by lawyers and investigators, and felt like she was waking up from a 2-year nightmare. These people believed her. They were taking her seriously. They were treating her stolen work as the crime it was. But the process was grueling. Depositions, document reviews, meetings that stretched late into the night. Marcus's lawyers fought back hard, filing motions to dismiss, claiming the statute of limitations had passed, arguing that the work had been collaborative, and Emma was simply a disgruntled ex trying to cash in on her former partner's success. The media got wind of the case. Tech blogs picked up the story. Waitress claimed she created algorithm behind $450 million company. The headlines were skeptical. The comments sections brutal. Emma was called a gold digger, a liar, a woman scorned trying to destroy her ex's success. It was devastating. But this time, she wasn't alone. Khalid was there for every deposition, sitting in the back of the room, his presence a silent reminder that she had backup. He hired a PR firm to counter the negative press. He connected her with other women in tech who had faced similar theft and discrimination. He made sure she ate, slept, didn't work herself into exhaustion. And slowly, as they spent long nights reviewing evidence and strategy, something shifted between them. The attraction had always been there. Emma would have been blind not to notice it. But now it deepened into something more. Respect, partnership, trust. One night, 3 weeks into the legal battle, they were alone in Khalid's office at 2 a.m., reviewing testimony transcripts. Emma's eyes were burning with exhaustion. She rubbed them, trying to focus. "You should rest," Khalid said gently. "I'm fine. You're exhausted. Emma, you don't have to prove anything to me. I already know you're brilliant." She looked up at him, this powerful man who had reorganized his entire schedule to help her, who had spent what was probably millions of dollars on her case without ever asking for anything in return. "Why are you really doing this?" "I told you why. You said you're falling in love with me. But you don't really know me. You know the version of me that serves you dinner. You know the version that fixes a security flaw. But you don't know. I know that you speak 5 languages fluently. I know that you think in algorithms and dream in code. I know that you're kind to people even when they don't deserve it, and strong even when you're breaking inside. I know that you love old movies and terrible coffee, and that you hum when you're concentrating. I know that you're terrified of trusting people again, but you're doing it anyway because you're brave enough to take the risk." He moved closer. "I know enough, Emma, and I want to know more. I want to know everything." Emma's breath caught. I'm not the person I was before Marcus. I'm damaged. You're not damaged. You're healing. There's a difference." Khalid reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "And I'm not the man I was before I met you. I was arrogant, dismissive. I treated people like they were invisible. You made me see that. You made me want to be better. You refused to tip me," Emma said, but she was smiling slightly. "I was an ass. I'm still an ass sometimes. But I'm trying." He smiled back. "Will you have dinner with me? Not as a waitress and a customer. as equals, as whatever we're becoming. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, saw past the wealth and the power to the man underneath, the man who had listened to her story without judgment, the man who had weaponized his resources not for profit, but for justice, the man who looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." They didn't kiss that night, but they held hands across the conference table, and it felt like a promise. The case moved forward. Patricia Chin filed for an expedited hearing, arguing that every day Cipher Shield Security operated using stolen intellectual property. Emma was being damaged. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, agreed. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in federal court. Emma wore a navy suit that Khalid had insisted on buying for her. "You're not going to battle in a waitress uniform," he'd said firmly. She felt like she was wearing armor. Marcus was there with his legal team, looking confident and relaxed. He smirked when he saw Emma, then his expression darkened when he saw Khalid beside her. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Patricia Chun presented the evidence with surgical precision. The commit logs, the timestamp files, the analysis showing the coding style matched Emma's other work. She called a forensic analyst to testify. She presented emails from graduate school professors confirming that Emma had been the primary researcher on the quantum cryptography project. Marcus's lawyers argued that the work had been collaborative, that Emma was misremembering her contributions, that she had no claim to patents filed after their relationship ended. But then Patricia played her trump card. She had found 3 of Emma's former classmates willing to testify that Marcus had struggled with advanced cryptography, that he had frequently asked Emma for help, that everyone in their program had known the algorithm was primarily her work. More damaging, the forensic analyst had found something in Cipher Shield's code, comments and documentation that were clearly in Emma's writing style, including a joke reference to a movie only she would have made. Marcus had been so confident in his theft that he hadn't even bothered to scrub her fingerprints from the work. The judge listened to everything, her expression unreadable. At the end of the hearing, she looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Thornton, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I remind you that you're under oath. Did you create the core algorithm that Cipher Shield Security is built on?" Marcus's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off. "The witness will answer." Marcus shifted in his seat. "We created it together. It was a collaborative." "That's not what I asked. Did you personally write the code for the quantum cryptography algorithm?" A long pause. Then quietly, "No, but I contributed to the theoretical framework, and..." "Who wrote the code?" Another pause. Marcus's face was red. "Emma did most of the coding, but..." "Thank you. That's all I needed to hear." The judge made a note. "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for expedited discovery. Mr. Thornton, you and your company will provide complete access to all development files, communications, and financial records related to the algorithm in question. This court will reconvene in 30 days for a full hearing. Until then, Cipher Shield Security is prohibited from entering into any new contracts or agreements based on the disputed technology." The gavel came down. Marcus's face went white. Outside the courthouse, Emma stood on the steps, breathing in the cold air, feeling like she might float away. Khalid stood beside her, his hand warm on her back. "We're not done yet," Patricia warned. "This is just the beginning, but it's a good beginning." Emma nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like she might actually win. The next 30 days were a whirlwind. Marcus's lawyers tried every tactic to delay, to dismiss, to discredit, but Patricia and her team countered every move. The discovery process revealed even more evidence. Internal Cipher Shield emails where Marcus had explicitly told employees not to contact Emma, financial records showing he'd paid off a former colleague to stay silent, communications with his father's law firm strategizing how to neutralize the Emma problem. The media narrative began to shift. Tech blogs that had been skeptical started publishing think pieces about intellectual property theft and gender discrimination in STEM. Former colleagues of Emma's came forward with their own stories of how Marcus had pressured them not to support her. A professor from MIT wrote an op-ed confirming that Emma had been one of the most brilliant students he'd taught in 30 years. Marcus's company began to crumble. Investors pulled funding. Clients canceled contracts. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. And through it all, Emma and Khalid grew closer. They had dinner at small restaurants where no one recognized them. They walked through Central Park at night, talking about everything and nothing. They fell asleep on his office couch, reviewing legal documents, waking up tangled together in the early morning light. Khalid was different from any man Emma had ever known. He challenged her intellectually, respected her professionally, and treated her like an equal in every way. He didn't try to fix her or save her. He simply stood beside her while she saved herself. One evening, a week before the final hearing, they were in his penthouse. Emma was pacing, nervous energy, making it impossible to sit still. "What if we lose?" she asked. "What if the judge decides there's not enough evidence, or Marcus's lawyers find some loophole, or—" "We won't lose." Khalid caught her hand, pulling her to a stop. "But even if we did, you wouldn't be losing. You already won, Emma. You stood up. You fought back. You refused to stay invisible. That's victory, regardless of what the judge says." "I want my work back," Emma whispered. "I want the world to know that I created something important. I want justice. You want justice. And you're going to get it." He cupped her face in his hands. "I promise you." Emma looked up at him. This man who had started as her worst customer and become her greatest ally. "I love you," she said. The word surprised her, but once they were out, she knew they were true. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to, but I do." Khalid's smile was brilliant. "Good, because I've loved you since the moment you smiled at me after I refused to tip you. You were so dignified, so strong, so completely yourself. I'd never met anyone like you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Emma, who had thought she would never trust again, never love again, let herself fall. The final hearing arrived on a cold December morning. The courtroom was packed, media, tech industry observers, supporters on both sides. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table, Khalid directly behind her, his presence a steady anchor. Marcus looked haggard. His company was in free fall. His reputation was destroyed. But he still wore that confident smile, still acted like he was going to walk away unscathed. The judge entered. Everyone stood, and the battle began. Patricia Chun presented a complete case, the evidence, the testimony, the forensic analysis. She showed, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Emma Carter had created the quantum cryptography algorithm that Cipher Shield security was built on. She showed that Marcus Thornton had systematically stolen that work, filed fraudulent patents, and built a company on lies. Marcus's lawyers tried to argue that even if Emma had done most of the work, the patents were filed in good faith, that there had been a misunderstanding, that Marcus had believed he had the right to use the work. But then Patricia called her final witness, Marcus's former business partner, a man named David Chun, who had left Cipher Shield 6 months after it launched. David testified that Marcus had explicitly told him the algorithm was stolen, that Emma didn't know about the patent filings, that the whole company was built on borrowed work. He laughed about it. David said quietly, he said Emma was too naive to protect herself, and by the time she figured it out, it would be too late. He said she'd never be able to afford to fight him. The courtroom went silent. Marcus's face was ashen. His lawyers looked like they wanted to disappear. The judge reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up. "I've heard enough. This is one of the clearest cases of intellectual property theft I've encountered in my 23 years on the bench. Mr. Thornton, you deliberately and systematically stole Ms. Carter's work, filed fraudulent patents, and built a company on stolen intellectual property. Your actions were not a misunderstanding or a good faith error. They were calculated theft." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The patents of the quantum cryptography algorithm are hereby transferred to Emma Carter. Cipher Shield Security is ordered to cease all operations using the disputed technology immediately. Ms. Carter is awarded full ownership of the algorithm, plus damages to be calculated based on Cipher Shield's revenues over the past 2 years. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution for fraud and perjury." The gavel came down. Emma sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. She'd won. She'd actually won. Behind her, Khalid squeezed her shoulder. Patricia was smiling. Across the aisle, Marcus had his head in his hands. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emma stood on the steps, Khalid beside her, and gave a brief statement. I didn't fight this battle for revenge. I fought it because the truth matters. Because women in STEM deserve to have their work recognized and protected. Because no one should be able to steal someone's life's work and get away with it. Today, justice was served. And I hope my case encourages others who have been stolen from to stand up and fight back. The cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. But Emma just smiled, a real, genuine, joyful smile, and walked away with Khalid's hand in hers. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Marcus. Cypher Shield security collapsed within a week. Investors sued. The board fired him. The U.S. attorney filed criminal charges. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Emma, meanwhile, found herself flooded with opportunities. Google offered her a senior position. Microsoft wanted her to lead a new cryptography division. Apple sent a personal recruitment letter. But Emma had other plans. 3 months after the trial, she stood in a sleek office space in downtown Manhattan, looking out at the city that had witnessed her fall and her rise. The sign on the door read, Carter Security Solutions, founder and CEO, Emma Carter. Khalid had offered to invest, not as charity, not as a gift, but as a genuine business partnership. He would be a silent partner, providing capital and connections while Emma ran the company. Her company, built on her work, her vision, her terms. The launch party was small and intimate, just close friends, a few former colleagues who had supported her, and a legal team that had made it all possible. Emma wore a midnight blue dress and felt like herself for the first time in years. Khalid found her on the balcony, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. He handed her a glass of champagne. Congratulations, Miss Carter. CO looks good on you. Emma laughed. It feels surreal. 6 months ago, I was serving you dinner, and you were refusing to tip me. About that, Khalid pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I believe I owe you something. Emma opened it. Inside was a check for $1 million. In the memo line, he'd written, tip for exceptional service, plus interest. She stared at it, then started laughing. Really laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from joy and relief and the sheer absurdity of life. You're insane. I'm in love with you. There's a difference. He set down his champagne glass and took both her hands. Emma Carter, you are the most brilliant, brave, infuriating, fascinating person I've ever met. You've changed my life. You've made me want to be better, do better, see the world differently. I don't want to be your silent partner. I don't want to be your investor. I want to be your partner in everything. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to argue about code and politics and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. I want everything. Emma's breath caught. Khalid, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. We've only known each other 6 months, and you spent most of that time fighting for your life's work. But I'm asking you to consider a future with me. A real future. As equals. As partners. As whatever we want to be. Emma looked at him. This man who had started as her worst customer and become her greatest love. This man who had seen her at her lowest and helped her rise. This man who had never tried to save her, only stood beside her while she saved herself. Yes, she said, to all of it. Yes. Khalid smiled, brilliant and genuine, and kissed her as the Manhattan skyline glittered around them. 6 months later, Emma's company had 15 employees and contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her algorithm was being used to protect financial systems, healthcare data, and government communications. She'd been featured in Forbes, Wired, and MIT Technology Review. She'd given a TED Talk about intellectual property theft and resilience that had been viewed 3 million times. Marcus Thornton was serving 18 months in federal prison for fraud and perjury. Cypher Shield Security had been liquidated, its assets sold to pay back investors and cover Emma's damages. And Emma Carter, once invisible, once broken, once stolen from, was finally, completely, triumphantly herself. On a warm June evening, Khalid took her back to the Azure Palace. They sat at table 1, where it had all begun. But this time, Emma wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a designer dress and confidence that came from knowing her worth. The waiter, a young man named James who Emma had mentored and helped get into a coding boot camp, brought their wine with a smile. "To new beginnings," Khalid said, raising his glass. "To justice," Emma countered. "To us." They clinked glasses, and as Emma looked across the table at the man who had refused to tip her and ended up changing her life, she thought about the security camera footage that had started everything. The footage of her, alone at midnight, fixing a problem that wasn't hers to fix, doing the right thing when no one was watching. That's who she was. That's who she had always been. And no one, not Marcus, not the industry that had rejected her, not the world that had tried to make her invisible, could ever take that away. "I love you," she said. "I love you, too," Khalid replied, "even though you still refuse to accept that tip." Emma laughed. "I donated it to a scholarship fund for women in STEM. Every penny." "Of course you did." Khalid shook his head, smiling. "You're impossible. And you're arrogant." "We're perfect for each other." They were. Against all odds, despite everything, they absolutely were. And as they sat in a restaurant where a billionaire had once refused to tip a waitress, where security cameras had captured a moment of integrity at midnight, where two unlikely people had found each other in the most unexpected way, Emma Carter finally felt like she was home, not in a place, but in herself, in her work, in her love, in the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. She had been invisible. She had been stolen from. She had been broken. But she had risen. She had fought. She had won. And that, Emma thought as Khalid reached across the table to take her hand, was the greatest victory of all.